Member for Light.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And I'd like to make a small contribution to this debate and welcome the opportunity to discuss this important issue, because I think this issue is in some ways symbolic of other reforms which we may have to undertake in the Parliament if we are to survive this century and gain the trust of the people who elect us in this place. And I think the idea of having an independent speaker would certainly enhance the way the chamber operates. And so I thank the member for Florey for bringing this bill before us. And I'm hopeful that the bill will be successful. But even if it's not, I think the debate in itself is worthwhile having, because it does challenge what we've, certainly in the time I've been here, almost 16 years, does challenge the way we think about this chamber. And that brings me to the next point. What are the benefits of having potentially an independent speaker? And I should say at the outset, Mr Deputy Speaker, that in what I'm saying, as other members have spoken before me, this is not a reflection on any speaker. This is about the position of speaker rather than current incumbent or previous incumbent. And all the speakers who've been held that position in my time in this chamber have all had their strengths, and some had some less strengths than others. But all of them have done the best they can. But all of them have been members of parties, and all of them have, to some extent, been influenced by that relationship to their party. My personal view is Speaker Atkinson is probably the one who had a slight independent streak about him and would often chastise our side of Parliament as often he would the other side of Parliament. And so for that, I do have some insights of what potentially an independent speaker could do. In terms of the benefits of having an independent speaker, and I think it's very important and something which is perhaps lost in this chamber, but also lost in probably in all lower house chambers in all Australian territories and jurisdictions, is that often the Parliament and the Executive become one. The reality is, if you have a majority party who heads this chamber, and the Speaker is one of them, that party, the line between the Executive and the chamber, or the line between the Executive and the Parliament, is a very fragile line. And invariably, because the Speaker relies on their position by the support of their own party, that must influence, if not consciously, unconsciously, the way they may vote at time from time in their position. And that's not suggesting anything improper. That is just suggesting is just a political reality. So having the idea of an independent speaker would certainly remove that sort of restriction or constraint or that pressure or bias from the Speaker of the day. And I think it's very important. It's an important distinction in our democratic institutions that the Executive and the Parliament are seen as two separate institutions, but the reality is in practice they become one. Because when the major party, which forms government, also controls the speakers and chairman of all those committees, etc., it is very hard to hold the Executive of the day accountable for their performance. Other speakers have alluded to that in terms of question time. Question time, you can see, if you like, the brutal end of the strong link between the Executive and the Parliament, in the sense that often ministers can, while the rule says ministers can answer a question in whichever way they wish to, at times they don't even go close to the question which is asked. With an independent speaker, I think that would change. And that would change for the better. And that would not only change for the better what happens in Parliament in terms of accountability of the government of the day, that also would change how the people outside this chamber would perceive us. And that's very important, because we are, sadly, on a trajectory which people have less trust in our institutions. And unfortunately, both governments and the Parliament have less trust today than they did some years ago. We need to redress that if we are to maintain a civil society. So I think that breaking that strong nexus between Executive and Parliament, I think is an important one. An independent speaker would also give the opportunity for the Speaker to be a defender of the legislature much more clearly and speak on behalf of the legislature rather than speak on behalf of the majority party of the day. And I think that's a benefit too. The Speaker can actually speak with confidence, not only of the majority party, but all of the Parliament. And I think that's an important distinction, a very important thing to do. I know, having said that, I know some speakers, and particularly some deputy speakers, have done a very good job in that regard, but the reality is they are still seen to be a member of that party, although they have tried their very hardest to be impartial. And I think they've done, within those restrictions, have done an excellent job. Though the Speaker would also become a much more effective voice for the House rather than a voice for the party, because if they're independent, there's no obligation upon them to actually speak on behalf of their party or be seen to speak on behalf of the party, but they would speak on behalf of the Parliament itself. Now, there's some of the things which I think are worth considering, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in the context of this bill. So there's some of the strengths I see of it. I'm happy to listen to what may be some of the drawbacks. One drawback which has been brought to my attention is that if a member of a political party has to resign their position to become the Speaker, it then means that political party is minus one member on the floor. In English Parliament, where that happens, it's not so much a big issue, but we have a membership of 650 MPs. In a chamber of 47, one vote is perhaps more valuable, then 147th is perhaps more valuable than 650. But having said that, even in the British Parliament has a problem, because I think Margaret Thatcher came to government as a result of the previous government, Callaghan government, losing a vote of confidence by one vote. And the Speaker of the time was a Labor Speaker. Had he been on the floor, she would have not won, that vote of confidence wouldn't have got across the floor, and then we may not have seen Margaret Thatcher for some time. So that is one of the drawbacks of that, but one has to weigh up the drawbacks against the benefits. And from my point of view, at this stage, certainly what I've heard today, the benefits of having an independent Speaker outweigh the potential drawbacks. One of the things I do, like all members do, when you do tours of Parliament, particularly students, I know some members of Parliament on the other side like to bash unions, etc. I don't necessarily do that. I'm quite complimentary about some famous Liberal premiers. One of the things we talk about, though, is the bar and how the bar defines the floor of the chamber. And I explained to them how important that definition is, what it's about. It's about a battle between the then monarch and the legislature about power and who represents people, and how, I think it was James II, I'm happy to be corrected, was restored to the throne, was put on the throne. Sorry, Charles II, I'm corrected. After the Cromwell period, Charles II was put on the throne. It was done on the basis that he and his heirs and successor would never interfere with the running of the People's Chamber. And that's been important because previously speakers have been to some extent targeted by monarchs if they didn't toe the line, the monarch's line. And in fact, I think it was 7 speakers lost their lives, were beheaded by the monarchs of the day for not doing the right thing as the monarchs saw it. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, I think the first one of the speakers to be beheaded was about 510 years ago. Was King Henry VIII decided to behead one of the speakers, Edmund Dudley. Because obviously Edmund Dudley didn't do the right thing according to the King, apart from his poor wives of the day, who was, from his view, didn't do the right thing by him. So, sorry, Mr. Speaker. So it is important. The role of the Speaker is a very important role, Mr. Speaker. And so I understand the first Speaker was actually appointed in 1377. And over time, the position has evolved to maintain the independence of that Speaker, and the independence of that Speaker is important even today, as the member for West Torrens says, in our mother Parliament of England. And for those reasons, Mr Speaker, Deputy Speaker, I think we should support this bill.
Member for Taylor.